1075 The Game Podcasting is sponsored by Modern Exterminating, a family-oriented company. Professional, honest, and dependable pest control solutions. We're your one-stop shop for all pests.
Chris Lowe from On3, formerly of ESPN, gave his summer SEC standings, or not standings, rankings. Standings are what happened on the field. Rankings are a little more subjective. Now, people like to argue lists. I love a good preseason list. Not because I like to argue, because I'm just curious what people think. And right now, Chris Lowe has the South Carolina Gamecocks sitting there right at 10. Sandwiched in between the Florida Gators at 9, Missouri Tigers at 11. He's got South Carolina not at the bottom and not at the top, almost firmly in the middle of the pack at the SEC. I think it feels just right. From a projection standpoint, I feel like Chris Lowe's on to something. I think makes this list interesting is that he's a little higher on Florida than I might be, higher on Tennessee than I might be, in terms of just projecting. Now, it's going to be hard to project a team like Florida because of all the new pieces. How are they going to gel in year one? How is John Summerall prepared to be able to play at that job with a fan base, again, like South Carolina baseball, starving to get back to a level of prominence they have had for a long time? They're awfully eager over there to get back. Maybe not a lot of patience. They brought in a lot of good talent. Question at quarterback. A lot of questions there for Florida. It's going to be a tough projection for them. I think Tennessee is going to be a similarly tough projection just for different reasons. As it relates to where South Carolina is on this list, what I think 10 is a proper reflection of what your ceiling and your floor is, right? The things that kept you from being any good last year from a record standpoint are the things that's going to keep national media or people who cover the SEC from maybe being able to buy in immediately. Kind of like the offensive line. If you look at maybe the reason South Carolina won't achieve what their goals are this year, and what can keep you from that is the offensive line play. It's the summer of the biggin for a reason, because the offensive line let you down last year so bad to the point you had to fire the offensive line coach before we got out of the third week of October. It let you down so bad that Lenore Sellers had to run for his life with regularity during the season, and it kind of limited what Lenore Sellers could be. I don't know if I saw many games last year where one team had a 65% pressure rate on dropbacks, but LSU had that against South Carolina and Baton Rouge, and that was a microcosm of your season. And because of that, people couldn't buy in on the offense. And you have so many new offensive linemen. I think you can like what South Carolina brought in. And I do. Let's assume Jacarius Peak is maybe missing the first two non-conference games against Kent State and Towson. And if you can get him back by Mississippi State, you got him for the whole conference slate and the Clemson game. I really like Jacarius Peak a lot. I think there's a reason that guy was considered one of the most highly coveted offensive lineman in the transfer portal coming in from NC State. Bruce Feldman had him on his freaks list. He's an athletic specimen at a really good size. I like that they brought in a lot of offensive linemen that have a lot of experience. They've got a lot of tear on them, a lot of football calluses that have molded them to where they can be mature enough to be able to handle this sort of thing. But how they gel together is going to be a big question mark. Offensive line is a chemistry-based unit. You may have a really good offensive lineman, but have a bad offensive line unit, right? They all have to function as one unit. That's why they give an award out for the Joe Moore Award being a team award, a unit award for offensive linemen. And they don't have to play to that level. They just have to play at a level acceptable enough to where it can allow Kendall Briles to open up his offense, allow Kendall Briles to be able to utilize Lenore Sellers' speed, his athleticism, his ability to break tackles while also exhibiting the strong arm that he's got, hanging below his right shoulder. Because Lenore's can throw a really good deep ball. And Lenore's, too, there was some yin and yang with him in 24 and 25. In late 24, you could say that guy was one of the best quarterbacks in college football. In 2025, he ran for his life a lot. He regressed as a passer a little bit. And you could, attribute all of that to the offensive line. You can attribute a lot of that to what Mike Shula was as an offensive coordinator. And, well, there's a reason he didn't make it as a full season as a play caller at South Carolina. That all that right there is kind of to say I can see why there is going to be maybe some national skepticism towards South Carolina, to where you might not see a list like this where Carolina's higher than 10, because it's recency bias. It's the last thing that we saw from this football team was bad line play on offense, a regression in your quarterback. Yeah, Nick Harbor's a really good playmaker, and his numbers year after year have only gotten better each season, so there's been some true development there with him at that position. But can you block well enough? Football's blocking and tackling. Can you block well enough to where the concerns that most people that cover college football or even cover this team are going to have? That's the number one question. And I think that skepticism makes it fair to put him at 10. But one thing I think that's interesting in this is that Chris Lowe also mentioned, the defense having what I would consider a very high floor. He said, he mentioned 4 of the 6 defensive starters returning, or not just 4 of the 6 top tacklers returning, if I could speak correctly, from last year's team. That's going to help. I think there's a lot of trust in Clayton White as a defensive coordinator. I think his reputation has significantly gotten better over the last couple of years with South Carolina's defenses. And I think there is some trust in there to assume that South Carolina, at minimum, is just a above average defense. And again, that's at minimum. And I think if anybody covers the sport and you take into account that, you got Tommy Durjai from Illinois, who was an honorable mention Big Ten player, and you're able to add Caleb Herring, who showed some promise at Tennessee as an edge rusher to pair opposite of Dylan Stewart, you can look at South Carolina's defense and say, I don't think that's what's going to keep you from winning games. Again, maybe that's one of the reasons why he's got South Carolina at 10 instead of maybe further down, despite the offensive concerns. But I think all of that together, to me, makes a summer SEC rankings list a pretty fair assessment, I would say, of South Carolina. They can certainly be a lot better, and I'm not going to doubt that they can be a lot better than the 10th best team in the SEC. But I don't fault anybody for looking what happened last year. Even if you like what they brought in on the offensive line and you like all the coaching changes, like I do, right? I like Kendall Briles a lot. I think that's an upgrade. I think Randy Clements is an upgrade at the offensive line position. I love what you got with Stan Drayton coaching running backs. You can like all of that and still have some very fair skepticism based off what you had last season. Sacks aren't just an offensive line stat. I think a lot of people just look at the sack numbers and say, this was unacceptable from your offensive line. And that can be true to a degree, but there's also dual responsibility here with your quarterback to be able to know when the pocket's breaking down, or if you do get some reps or some snaps throughout the game in which the blocking holds up a little bit, can you go ahead and make a play and release the ball? And I think there was a little bit of both of that last year, because Lenore Sellers had one of the higher pressure sack percentages of any quarterback with a certain amount of snaps last year per Pro Football Focus. That was something that was a constant really from the beginning of the season to the end, because he would at times hold on to it maybe a little too long. Maybe there was some paralysis by analysis based off of what Mike Shula's offense was for him and how it affected him. That can certainly allow a quarterback to maybe second guess enough to where you're taking more sacks. That's something that he'll have to improve upon this year too, no matter how the offensive line ends up performing.